Today is December 5th, 2023. My name is Advika Rajiv, and I'm with the Houston Asian American Archive. I'm talking today with Dr. Hiromi Takayama, a Japanese language professor and researcher at Rice University. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today.
So just to get started, can you please state your full name and where and when you were born?
I'm Hiromi Takayama. I was born in Japan, in Oita, in south of Japan. Should I tell my birth date? Or year, just a year.
Yeah. Anything's
Okay.
fine.
Oh, okay. I was born in April 9th, 1974.
Thank you. And how do you identify ethnically?
I'm Asian.
You noted that you have one sibling. Are they younger, older than you? And what was your relationship like growing up?
A year younger, younger brother.
Okay.
Well, because of the gender, difference and also close age, we were not too close as siblings, I don't think. So also we had really different personality and interests. So for example, I'm the oldest sibling, so I'm more patient. Once I determined something and I can keep working, I have that kind of endurance. But my younger brother has different personality, that he had more interests for various things, but for him it was hard to keep working on specific things. So since our personality differences and different interests, we weren't that close, I think.
Okay. I'm also the oldest sibling, so I understand that dynamic.
Yeah.
How would you describe your household and town when you were growing up? Are there any specific memories or moments from your childhood that you remember?
One thing I remember the most is my memory with my grandfather and grandmother. It's very common in Japanese culture, but sometimes we live with grandfather and grandmother. I didn't live with them, but we lived really close to them. So I went their house almost every day to have dinner together. Especially my mom was helping them for work, so my mom was busy working. My grandmother took care of us, me and my younger brother. So I was really close, especially to my grandmother.
Awesome. Speaking about your parents, what values did your parents place in you and your sibling when you were growing up?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I believe it all depends on each household. For my family, I admit that I'm really close to my mother. And well, mothers, I think mothers have a lot more work for household, for jobs related to houses, to run houses. So then our family as well. My mom did all the cooking, cleaning, washing, everything in my house. While I was watching her doing it, I knew that she worked really hard for us. So that's probably one of the reasons I feel really close to my mom. well, in the meantime, my dad was working for a company, for a small company. And back then, like, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it was really important for Japanese man work outside, work for a company and really loyal to the companies. So my dad was also one of them, worked hard for his company. So he worked long, as well as this is also Japanese culture, but he had to had uh well, you know, got out with his colleagues and also his some people who's related to his work that they had to drunk then um well outside of outside of the work they had to have relationship not only for business but even outside of the business, that they have to be close so that they can work better and more closely and smoothly. So he had to drunk and um, well, I don't know how to explain in English, but for his business to work to build better relationship with his business related people, that he had to drink with them, had dinner with them until late. When I was small, that's why I didn't remember much with spending time with my dad, because he worked late for that reason.
See, that makes sense. Kind of diverging into a little bit more about education. Can you describe your primary school and like which schools did you attend and any memories that you have from that?
Mhm. For particularly for my elementary, junior high, and high school, well, even up to all the for my PhD degrees, I went to public schools. So throughout my education in Japan, I went to all public school systems all the way to my undergrad degrees. I didn't go to private schools. So that means uh, particular way that I was mingled with various kinds of socioeconomic status, students, just like me from a middle class. But luckily for elementary and junior high, we call it, middle school in Japan, junior high. I went to elementary school and junior high schools to a pretty good area that some of the sons and daughters, some of the students are from well somewhat wealthy family and also higher job status in parents from that kind of households. Not particularly for my my family, more middle class, but even for middle class area, our area was for the school as the school district, I would say our public elementary school and junior high school were better schools, better than probably average in Japan in a rural area.
See, were there any memories that you remember specifically like from that time?
Well, let's see. Now that I've been living in the US, well, a little less than 20 years, I found this is, Japanese culture and Japanese school system. Under Japanese school system, we are, well, we are asked to do a lot of group works. Well, more like a, group, not group works, but group activities that requires a lot of as a group, we had to participate in school, sport festival, culture festivals. Whatever we do, we are asked to act certain ways as a group. So here, more individualistic, but in Japan, more collectivism, that we are expected to act a specific way. So, at the sport festival, we had to line up and we walk. Then we had to walk the same way. Everyone had to walk in the same way so that we show the unity, which is such an important part of our, culture and school culture. That's what I found in hindsight.
It's a really cool difference that you pointed out. About your classes, what are some early memories about learning history in your classes? Were there any specific events that stood out to you?
Particularly learning history. Doesn't matter Japanese history or world history.
No, anything.
Well, elementary school, I can't remember much. Even if we learned history when we were elementary school, but junior high, definitely yes. I think Japanese history we learned for some parts, but in general, even up to high school, I took world history as one of my electives. Junior high, we all have to learn as a requirement. We had to learn Japanese history, but our focus on learning history is pretty much memorizing what happened in which year and what happened in general, as a general knowledge, what happened in a particular year. So that's what I'm, all remember what I learned. So this year, this historic event happened. Then this is what happened after the year, but not like we never analyzed what really happened or what kind of people involved in the historic event, which I found later on in my life that I couldn't remember, what it meant. Of course, I know because I studied pretty hard, so I remember which year what happened, but I didn't even I didn't really understand what was going on behind, what was the rationale, what happened, and what really influenced, what the historic event influenced later events, those kind of things. So I would think that part definitely like in critical or analytical thinking or related to those analytical skills, critical skills, that's lack of Japanese history education.
See, that's interesting. Sort of segueing into your like immigration, moving to the US. What prompted you to come to California in 2006?
Yes, so the reason why I moved to the US was for my education to pursue higher education in the US. So first in 2003, I started from ESL, English as a second language, to learn English to be better. So and also I was working at a company in Japan for 6 years. Then I decided to be an English teacher in Japan. For that reason, I came to Southern California to start ESL. And then I was aiming to get a TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. TESOL certificate I was pursuing. So for that reason, I moved to Southern California. Then I was planning to be there for a year. Then I was going to go back to Japan and teach English. Then I did.
So when you first came to the US, was there any initial culture shock or surprises when you came?
Yeah, that's really a good question. Actually, I didn't have any culture shock when I moved to the first place I moved to was Irvine in Southern California, which has back then 2003. Well, the Caucasian people were close to the half of the so very majority back then, but almost the border that minority and majority are sort of like shifting. So that means for me, it was really comfortable to see a lot of Asian people in Irvine. So I didn't have any culture shock to move to Southern California. And also I'm from Southern Japan, weather-wise really mild, and it gets hot too. But in Southern California, it's even the weather is milder. So the climate-wise, and also people are open and nice. At least for me back then, superficially. So I found those people, people in Southern California were very kind, nice, approachable. I didn't have much cultural difference between Japan, where I lived, and in Irvine. So I actually didn't have any culture shock then.
Awesome, you had such a great transition to moving to the US.
Yes, yes.
Were there any significant individuals who really impacted you when you were moving to a new country?
Yes. First, significant people were my host family. They became my, American father and mother. So my host father and host mother were the closest American people, and the first contact became the closest. My host father was the second generation of Mexican American, so he didn't speak Spanish at all. But I was invited with his family, living to the next town from Irvine, so very close. So I went to his mother's house every Tuesday. I think every Tuesday evening that they got, Mexican family as a Mexican family, they had to have a big, weekly gathering. Then we were invited to. I was invited to. So I was really enjoyed, spending time with them. My host father's family. My host mother was a Caucasian American, very nice person, very sensitive person too. She was a special person for me that I didn't talk to her much. I'm not probably the talkative person. Um, Back then, I could communicate with her in English pretty well, but still, I'm not talkative to begin with, and I was still, struggling speaking in English. Then, even though I didn't talk to her or I couldn't express verbally, she could feel me, and she knew. It was almost amazing, but she knew what I wanted. She could almost like sense it. So, in that sense, she was very special for me. And she taught me, well, both of my, host family taught me a lot of American culture. Then also they taught me how American people are open and nice. So they were the perfect first contact for me.
Your host family sounds super, super sweet.
Yes, yes, definitely.
You mentioned you came to California to learn ESL first, but can you talk about where you attended college for a bachelor's and master's degrees?
Yeah. For my undergrad degree, I went to school in Japan, in Aichi Prefecture, the fourth biggest town in Japan. Because, I'm from a rural area. Then for my generation, it was very common that we wanted to move from a rural area to a big city. I was one of them. I wanted to move to a big city. I chose to go to, but I didn't have any choice that I could go to private school because of my financial situation at home. I went to a public school in Aichi Prefecture. Then I back then I was interested in learning foreign languages. I wanted to study English, but I, uh, well, because the Japanese university system, that we couldn't choose, at least for my department, I couldn't choose the program I really wanted to study. My first choice was English, but I couldn't get in because that was too competitive. So I my second choice was French, studying French and European culture. So I ended up studying French language and European culture as my major. So I was in humanity then, um, and this is also I was a typical Japanese university student. That the peak was university entrance exam. So I studied really hard to get in the university. Then I made it. So university entrance exam was my peak. After that, I was studying okay. I didn't have any issues for my, university, well, study, academic performance for my undergrad. But that was just easy, even though, I studied enough, just enough. I did get pretty good grade. So um, that means I, even though I studied French for 4 years, I couldn't speak French at all. I couldn't communicate in French at all. Now that, some decades later, I can't remember anything. So this is really sad and embarrassing. But also, I'm a typical Japanese, I was a typical Japanese college student. But at the same time, I had really good memories other than studying. I was into, club activities. Then I had a lot of friends from my dorms. So I had very good memories, but not much. I couldn't even remember what I did for my academic, for my academics life.
What kind of clubs and organizations were you a part of?
Yeah, I was in rugby club, but I wasn't a player. I couldn't. I'm not athletic at all. We call it manager, that, caretaker, that just, watching them how they're doing, and if they need water, or if they need some care, that if they get injured or something, we do. We support them, the players.
You clearly seem to have a lot of interest with like a bunch of different languages. So I'm curious, was there ever a moment in college or before that made you realize that language and teaching this is what you were passionate about?
Yeah, when I was a high school student, I was into, well, oldies music, like, Beatles, Carpenters, those things. That was my start. I started adoring, um, you know, US culture, British culture, mostly English speaking culture. And also, I really wanted to speak English fluently at some point. Then I also started, well, when I was my undergrad, I started getting into American dramas, like back then, Beverly Hills 90210, ER, other, dramas. I watched a lot. That's how I, um, being into mostly American culture, then English, speaking English too.
That sounds awesome.
Mhm.
Were there any influential professors or mentors that you remember that really shaped your professional life right now?
Yes. Um, well, in Japan, honestly, no. Of course, I remember some of the teachers when I was in elementary school, junior high, high school, because I was a good student and also studious student. Lots of teachers, um, well, cared about me, took care of me like closely, that because I was enthusiastic about studying, learning and with a positive manner. But language teaching, I um I got the influence the most was probably my private tutor from Japan. She taught me English since I was in elementary school, the fifth year. So since when I was 10 to, well, up to high school graduation. So about 8 years, I got private, sometimes well, with a couple of other students too. She was my role model that even now we became more like friends now that she is about 20 years older than me. Then she taught English for years and she went to the US study English, also, took ESL for a year or a couple of years, just for a couple of years. Then back in Japan and she taught English again. Then I was one of her students. Um, she what was special for me? Hmm, because she is also a female. She was she wasn't belong she didn't belong to any big schools like English language schools or anything. She was always working by herself. That's probably the reason I felt that she is independent. She speaks English, which I wanted to be someday, and also a woman. She became my role model now that she became my friend, like, close friend. She is definitely the one role model, but probably not seriously career wise because she's a private, almost like, more like a private tutor. At some point, I wanted to be more seriously toward in the academia. So I wanted to use, my knowledge and skill more professionally. So after thinking about that kind of thing, one of my professors from my MA program in TESOL, he is slightly older than me. He became because he knew really well about what Japanese people are like, and he contacted with a lot of Japanese students. He was always interested in different cultures, especially Japanese culture. Then I started talking with him about my future careers, my private lives. I started sharing with him a lot. He ended up becoming my older brother, but at the same time, he gave me a lot of professional advice too, how I can be more, better English teacher, perform better in academia, those things too. So I would think those two teachers are, well, personally close to me, and professionally, I thought, as them as a role model.
Sounds like you had some really great mentors that you could look up to, especially for like personal and professional life.
Yeah.
Going a bit more into your PhD program, your dissertation analyzed teaching efficacies between native English speaking teachers and non-native English speaking teachers in Japan. Could you talk more about what inspired this line of research and anything you found surprising in the results that you gathered?
Mhm. Now that I'm teaching English, well, I mean Japanese, but back then that was my passion, that I really, really wanted to teach English or wanted to educate foreign language teachers. For my PhD degree, I got a PhD degree in foreign language and ESL education, and I was on the ESL education track. That I wanted to do teacher training for English teachers and foreign language teachers. I was always interested in language teachers, especially English teachers. Myself, as a non-native speaker of English, I was always interested in how non-native English speakers or English teachers can develop their professional, well, how they can develop their professional performance, and how they can develop their more like a professional identity as an English teacher. So that was my start. I wanted to pursue that that difference between native speaking teachers and non-native speaking teachers of English, how they develop differently, personally and professionally, and what their differences in terms of their identity development. So that was my interest.
Seems you're very passionate about it, and it seems very cool that it's tied to your profession as it is right now. Having completed the research on education that you just explained and having been a language professor at several colleges, you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but how would you compare like teaching styles in the US versus Japan?
Yeah, that's a good question. Although I taught English in Japan a little bit, a little longer than a year, so I can't tell probably much about how to teach, teach English in Japan. But my experience, for many years, my experience of my as a student, um, I think the biggest difference is as in Japanese school system, especially for um, well, uh, elementary, junior high school, they rely on much on memorization, whereas in the US, we care more about critical analytical thinking. So we should know the basic stuff, but at the same time, we have to apply the basic stuff into applications or practice. That's what I found the most. So when I taught English in Japan, I didn't have a chance to talk. I didn't have a chance to teach, communication based class. I taught more test taking skills. So that's probably the one thing that I can't generalize, or I can't tell even in general of foreign language classes in Japan. But I think in Japan, because of the emphasis on tests, somewhat Japanese teachers are expected to teach test taking skills, and also they always have to think how students can do well on the exam. That kind of thing we teachers always have to think. But in the US, yes, ESL, when I was taking ESL, yes, I had to do well on the test too. But for my graduate studies, not much. More like, how I think, the process of my thinking, and how critical I can be. And I have to express how I analyze things, which I found more important than how much knowledge I have. So that's the biggest difference for me.
Having noticed these like pros and cons between the teaching styles,
Mhm.
how have you implemented this into your own teaching style in classrooms?
Mm. Well, to study language, especially foreign language, up to certain points, of course, it's required to memorize things. I mean, even well, if we we don't memorize vocabulary words or grammar structures, we can speak anything. So it's really important to memorize so that we can express ourselves. But at the same time, it's probably more important to use what we learned through language. Is more important, I realized. So I want my students, I try to create activities that students can, of course, first, I want them to learn, and I want them to understand a specific, let's say, a specific grammar structure. Then once they know how to use it, then I try to let them work on how to use them in context. I try to, I always try to emphasize them how to use a specific grammar structure or vocabulary words in context. I always think to incorporate that into my language activities, language teaching. Is that enough as an
Yes,
experience?
absolutely. It
Yeah.
definitely makes a lot of sense, how you said, especially when you're learning something like language, to actually
Mhm.
focus more on like practicing it rather than just learning how it works. So I definitely see.
Mhm.
Um, Sort of segueing into like your career timeline.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you worked as a programmer in a factory in Japan. What
Mhm.
made you pursue that position, and what did you learn from that experience?
Mhm. Well, so that was my first career after graduating my college. Then, so what happened behind was I wanted to be a civil servant, like a, government worker. I want it, but I'm the second baby boomer in Japan. That means within for these, 2, 3 years, well, the population concentrates really much for these, a year I I was born and these prior and later a year or two, the population is concentrated, so densely populated in our, these 2, 3 years. So everything was so competitive when I was young. To get in, well, university was really hard. To get a job was really hard too. So I couldn't make it. I couldn't pass the exam. Well, that was like, back then, like 1 out of 40 could be a, government worker or something. So extremely hard for me to get in. I couldn't make it for that. Then, well, after taking all the tests for to be a government worker, it was already almost, late to look for a job. Then I found, a job. I just applied for a couple of jobs. Then I got this one, working at the factory. Then when I was young, I wasn't thinking too much about, my career. I wasn't sure what I could do. That was the thing. When I was young, I didn't know. So here, I just applied for a couple of jobs and I got one. And okay, yeah, then I'll just get it. I started working at the factory. I thought I was gonna do like a HR kind of job. That's what that was the job description. Then that was, I applied for, but they, changed the well, they changed. Then I ended up uh, working as a programming that I've never done before, but actually anyone could do. So I could do, not trained at all. So that was a disappointment for me, because I didn't get a job for that particular job. But there was no choice. If the company said, then I started doing it, but I didn't like it. And also I didn't know what the the work is like. I didn't know how. I wasn't serious about working. I didn't know what I could do. I didn't know what I wanted to. So everything I I didn't know, and I wasn't serious about working. So that means I didn't enjoy doing it. So after 2 years, and also I was living by myself in a small town. I'm from a small town. I'm from a rural area, but even, I moved to an even smaller town. I didn't like the town either. Also, I didn't. I wanted to live with my parents. I wanted to live in my parents' house, but I couldn't. So um, I, stayed there for 2 years, and I was happy moving back to my parents' house, and I got a better job in, many ways.
So can you give like a rough timeline from that first job to where you are right now?
Could you say that again? What's that?
Can you just give like a timeline from your first job at that
Mhm.
factory to your job right now at Rice?
Okay. Well, so for 2 years, I worked at a company, well, at the factory. And after that, I worked for an insurance company in my hometown for 4 years. 2 years for HR, 2 years for, uh, I would say, like a sales department. Then after that, I moved to the US. I moved to Irvine and San Diego for a total of a year. I took ESL, and I got a TESOL certificate. After a year, I went back home. Then I taught English a little longer than a year at a high school and a university. Then after that, I went back to San Diego, got a master's degree for a year. Then I moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin. I stayed there a little longer than 2 years, 2 years and 4 months. I worked for a Japanese company um, that sent Japanese students to the US for study abroad experience, for a short term to long term as a undergrad students or graduate students. I connected with them and talk with them once a month, make a report, and report to their parents. Those students are all over in the US. I worked at the University of Wisconsin La Crosse. Some of the students are UWL, but other students are all over in the US. I did the job for about 2 years, and then I was accepted for a PhD program in the University of Iowa. I stayed in Iowa for my PhD degree for 6 years. I worked as a Japanese TA for 6 years, and after that, I was hired as a full-time Japanese instructor for 2 years after my PhD graduation. Then I moved to Houston. I got a job at Rice University, and now I'm teaching Japanese at Rice for this is my 6th year.
Right, that sounds awesome. You mentioned that you taught both high schoolers and undergraduate students.
Mhm.
Have you noticed any like differences in like
Mhm.
learning styles or how you've had to come across in like your teaching style?
Mm. Yeah, for teaching high school experience, I can't tell much because I taught those high school students once a week, just an hour, and very specific in the very specific program. So depending on which high school we teach in Japan, we can tell um, for we can tell what teaching at high school is like, I think, because we have a high school entrance exam after junior high. So for example, like I went to the competitive um well Kanachiban school, high school in my prefecture, even though I'm from a small town, but the school to get in the high school is pretty hard. So I went to that kind of school. The one I taught was different from those schools. So I taught English, and it's just an hour a week. and also test-taking skills that for those high school students are even in the English program. They are in the English program, but their academic performance, academic level is not that high. It's a private school, meaning, in rural area, most of the students go to public schools. So sometimes those students who can't pass the entrance exam to go to public school, they go to private schools. So that shows some of the students might have, less motivated for studying. Lots of the students don't go to university. So I taught that kind of school just once a week. Also, another thing was because I wasn't even the, part-time teacher, like a part-time teacher. So only for a week, an hour a week means not much contact. I couldn't develop much, relationship with my students. Also, I had about 40 or 50 students. I couldn't even contact with them individually. So it was really hard for me to teach to those students because I don't have any relationship with them much. They see me just once a week. They don't know me much. They are, taking the course for test taking, for a test. It wasn't really, honestly, it wasn't a fun experience for me. And I always wanted to teach teach English or foreign language at university level. So that was also the call that okay, teaching high school is not my thing, and I appreciate that I could learn it from my experience. Whereas I taught English at a college in my hometown, that was fun. Although I wasn't teaching full time. I didn't have much, connection with them. Probably 2 hours a week I taught English to them. So not much contact either, but fewer students, uh, less than 10 or about 10 students a class. So I had, better connection with them. And also, those students are more motivated to learn English because it was what we call it international school. Half of the students are Japanese, but the rest half are international students from all over the world, mostly Southeast Asia. So because of the environment and also student motivation, for me, it was really fun to teach them. Although the content wasn't too fun, test taking skills, but I enjoyed teaching to them. That also that was also another call that, oh, okay, I really want to teach, to college students, not high school students, and teach, foreign language to students.
It's really cool that you had this journey to like really identify what it was that you were passionate about and then pursue that.
Yeah.
If you had to summarize your teaching philosophy in a couple sentences, how would you do that?
A couple of sentences. I always tell my students two things at the beginning of the semester. I want them to enjoy learning Japanese or English or whatever language they are learning. And I want them to study hard. That's all. That's all two things I always tell my students. And also, if you study hard, then you're going to be better. That means you're going to enjoy more. So study hard. Those things I tell my students. And that's probably my teaching philosophy.
Yeah, awesome. How do you incorporate teaching about Japanese culture along with language?
Could you say that again?
How do you incorporate teaching about the culture of Japan along with just
Okay.
language?
Yeah. First, I moved to the US when I was 29. When I started ESL program, I was 29. My identity was pretty much, confirmed as Japanese. I think myself as a typical Japanese, although, we can't generalize who the typical Japanese are, but I think I have in my, in myself, I have strong Japanese identity. If I moved to the US when I was young, my identity shifted a little more, but I don't think I changed much as Japanese. Like that, I had really, you know, strong Japanese identity. I learned, and also I went through all the education system up to my undergrad. I went through Japanese education systems. So I sometimes, well, uh, well, when I started, teaching career, I struggled a bit to change my teaching style to fit in this culture because it's hard for us to change something because mm, it's also the way that how we are learned. It's also easy that to teach how we are learned. So that means it's difficult to change our teaching style from how we are learned. So mm, when I teach Japanese as Japanese, I believe I present Japanese culture. And also, I ask my students a lot of almost tedious things as a Japanese that, for example, like, penmanship is such an important, part of Japanese culture. Also, um, well, keep the paper neatly, when they submit paper is also important for us as, to respect to others. Those tiny things to how to act in the classroom too. Um, well, mm, so in the classroom, even in the classroom actions, classroom management for me, I ask my students to fit the Japanese standard. Like when mm, when I'm speaking, I don't want them to speak when because and also I try not to lecture. I always try to reduce my lecture time. So I try to not to speak much, but when I speak, I want them to listen. Probably, I don't know, this is my personality, or comes from my personality, or cultural thing, but I might control students so that students can learn more like, Japanese way. That might be my, me incorporating into, incorporating my, teaching style or teaching language into my classroom. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's very interesting how you're bringing across like the Japanese mannerisms that you're teaching in class along with just the language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you encourage your students to watch manga to improve their language comprehension?
Yeah, sure, sure. Lately, I found a lot more about this. Students who exposed to Japanese culture outside of the classroom perform better, especially for those activities that's not much language, controlled, meaning, grammar or, tests, those things, if they learn from the textbook and they they memorize things and they express themselves or they do better on the test, they perform well. But I realized that's not enough. For example, if they want to speak like, a specific topic, if they want to speak in Japanese for 2 minutes, not only, if they, it's not enough that not only from the textbook knowledge. So I definitely ask my students, if I know, right, students are very busy, but if they have, some spare time, I want them, and I also tell them that, if you can spend some time to, read manga or, watch anime, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, I tell them that do them, and that's going to affect their performance too. So I tell them.
I think that's really cool how you saw that like increase in performance for people who do this
Oh
like
yeah.
outside of the classroom.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Mhm.
That might be even more important than textbook study. I don't want to admit
Yeah.
this, as a teacher, but that's what I found.
So moving on to something like a lot more like contemporary, I guess. Has the advent of like commonplace AI affected your teaching and your students' learning in any way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So while I was checking the essay, I didn't think I found anyone using AI. Partly, probably, but I'm fine with it. Because, as a non-native speaker of English, I always check on Google, which ways, because it's so hard for me to choose the right vocabulary words to use in context. So I, search on Google which one is better, A and B, then, which one has more votes, those kind of things, search, I do a lot for myself too. So I don't worry too much, using micro things, for my students. Then I was reading my students' writing, essay. Then honestly, I couldn't find any of them using or funny expressions that, or I don't know, I believe my students too much. But for my course, I don't think, they are affected much.
I think it's very interesting to hear your perspective on this, especially as like a language teacher. So that's
Hmm.
very cool.
Hmm.
In your opinion, is there anything that can't be replaced by AI, specifically in language learning?
Oh, instead of people, human beings.
Hmm.
Mm, instead of AI. Hmm. Because language comes from people instead of AI. AI's only people can create languages. You are not thinking about someone outer space or something, right? Not that kind of thing, right?
No, I was just curious, like, when you're teaching language, is there anything that you've noticed that AI cannot replace?
Oh, AI cannot replace.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I think I misunderstood your answer. Creative work, but that's not true either. Yeah. So, for example, this semester, I asked my students to create haiku. Sorry, senryu, 575, 575, 17 sound, non-line poetry in Japanese. I like, of course, human beings' creativity is should not be surpassed by AI. But it's also true that we can chat GPT, we can just, put, can you create good, send you by using these words or something, right? Yeah. So, mm, yeah, it's a tough question. Yeah, but creativity, yeah, I would still think creative work, creative writing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm.
Sort of transitioning on to your community involvement. You're part of several community organizations like the Japanese Teachers Association of Texas, for
Mm.
which you're a treasurer this year, and the American Association for Applied Linguistics. Could you
Mhm.
talk more a little bit about your role in these organizations?
Well, Japanese Teachers Association of Texas. I became a treasurer last year, but at the same time, they're also, always looking for someone who do, um, leadership roles. Then it's hard for them to look for that. So I accepted it. Well, as a treasurer, I take care of the finance, for the group. It's a small and you know NPO NGO organization with, well, about 70 Japanese teachers in Texas. As a treasurer, so I work on the finance, and I also update the teachers membership. Well, as a treasurer, I have to make a report, annual report once a year, and I had to report at the conference, to the members. Um, yeah, and in general, we get, together. I mean, our board members get together once in a while, have a meeting, then to discuss, topics, the future, well, workshops, plan the workshops, and in general, keep the group going on. So maintain from small things to planning, for the conference, the part to the conference, and also the workshops, those things. Triple I try to submit proposals every year. Then, if it's accepted, I present in a conference. So for Triple it's a huge foreign language teachers association. I don't know how many even belong to. We also have a Japanese part. I mean, Japanese teachers association. Uh, what was the name? Oh, well, let's see. JTAD, Japanese Teachers Association. Um, well, some hundreds. I don't know. How many. Um, yeah. So part of the Japanese teachers group, we are accepted for a conference. So we have a session as a Japanese teachers. So, Japanese teachers have specific slots and we have, presentations. So if I'm accepted, I'm part of ATJ, and Japanese Teachers Association. So in that sense, I'm more, belong to ATJ, Japanese Teachers Association, that try to contribute, my academic work to them, so that we can share the the instruction practice in the classroom, also in research. So share the information with other Japanese teachers. That becomes the part of my community work to them.
It's awesome how these organizations all help you like provide information to one another and learn from each other. That's very cool.
Yeah.
I noticed like the Japanese Teachers Association of Texas website has a lot of Japanese programs offered from elementary school to university level in Texas. However, apart from colleges, Houston seems to be behind other Texas cities in offering Japanese to elementary through high school students. Could you share your insight on any possible reasons behind this?
Okay, so you said that compared to K to 12, university in Texas has less Japanese programs.
I think it's the other way. The colleges have a lot, but then like
More.
elementary through high school students don't have as much.
Okay. Well, I honestly I don't know about the Japanese education in K to 12 system. So how much those Japanese teachers have to work on to set up the program for K to 12, I don't know. But at the same time, well, even for college, I'm not sure how Japanese education, teaching Japanese is popular in Texas for college levels too. So that part I don't know. I mean, I can tell, definitely I can tell for K to 12. University, I believe, depending on the university, they choose the programs then. But good thing is, for Japanese language is almost always popular to for students to take courses, both K to 12 to university, especially I think university levels. So for some not commonly taught languages, they've been struggling for their enrollments for some foreign languages, but not much for Japanese. So for probably that reason, universities and colleges expect Japanese programs to for to stable students enrollment. That's probably the reason that universities it's there are more, Japanese programs for universities.
I see, that makes sense. Last year, you gave a presentation at the American Association of Teachers of Japan about incorporating anti-racist pedagogy into the foreign language classroom. What prompted you to give that speech, and how was that experience?
Anti-racist pedagogy is not, is not taught commonly in Japanese teaching. So I wanted to do something new. I had a chance to participate in a workshop provided by City Center for Teaching Excellence. They gave us a workshop that focuses on how to incorporate anti-racist pedagogy into our classroom. Then I took the workshop. I joined the workshop, and I found it very interesting that I didn't have much knowledge either. I hadn't done anything about anti-racist pedagogy in my classroom. So I wanted to do something new. And back then, the topic was really hot, that, because of the Black Lives Matter and other, those, things. So for the conference, I presented what I did for the course. So that was more like my report, how I use the topic anti-racist pedagogy to my class, to my instruction. Then I did I gave the presentation at the conference. Then I actually had a lot of audience. I mean, most of them or almost all of them were teaching Japanese. I mean, Japanese teachers. But after my presentation, I didn't have many questions. That was a little bit disappointing. Part of the reason was, my based on my analysis, because I gave the presentation in English, was probably one thing. And the other thing was, I thought anti-racist pedagogy is not used in Japanese instruction, Japanese classroom. So not many teachers were not really interested in anti-racist pedagogy, or I got the feedback. One of the feedback was that, like a question or feedback, was that I'm afraid of dealing with the conflicts among students, or if I choose if I can't choose the correct topic or appropriate topic, what should I do, or something like that. So the topic itself was hard, and also it probably doesn't quite fit in Japanese culture to discuss, put some, confrontations on the table, and, let's discuss about it. That kind of thing is not the Japanese culture either. So I found it interesting. At the same time, I found it a little bit disappointing that I didn't get, much feedback or, many questions.
So what were your perspectives on those questions that you were asked about? Like, how would you deal with those scenarios in your classroom?
Mm-hmm. What I did was I invited my students to choose their own topics. So whatever they are interested in related to anti-racist pedagogy, they could pick up their own topics, whatever they are interested in. So that was my bottom line. I for the lecture part, I introduced what the anti-race anti-racism is like, or is pursued, well, I mean perceived in Japan. I just I gave them a short paragraph to introduce. This is this is how anti-racist pedagogy is perceived in Japan. Then how this is how people think. And also I picked up an issue as I found the YouTube video that discussed the topic of how a Black comedian, fluent in Japanese, the Black comedian man is perceived in Japanese in Japan, or for Japanese people. So I gave them a very general sense or general knowledge or general perception how Japanese people think, or how what our attitudes are toward anti-racism pedagogy. But I didn't do anything really critical or like a really controversial issues. For example, well, the relationship between Japan and also Korean people living in Japan, born in Japan, those people. I mean, probably the more well, confrontations, like those things. I didn't touch anything because I was also one of my audiences that I wasn't sure how to deal with it, those controversial issues. And so yeah, I so that for me it made sense for that students could choose their own topics, or they wanted to discuss. Then they end up sharing with their classmates. Then that means there were how many students? There were more than 10 students, means more than 10 topics, because students had different interests. So that was good. That was also good varieties, and diversity among students, because each student had different interests. So that ended up yeah, well, ended up presenting in a good way with varieties, also based on their interests.
I think it's really amazing that you gave them that option, because now they're personally invested in that topic, and that will prompt them to do further research. So that's cool. Going a little bit more broad, what do you think about the Asian American community in Houston, and how would you compare it to those communities in Iowa and California?
Well, actually, another community I'm related to is JASH, is Japan America Society of Houston. I I work closely to them. For example, I'm into well, I like I like inviting my students to participate in Japanese speech contest once a year. Then they run the Japanese speech contest, and I sent my students a lot, and I end up connecting with them. So through those kind of activities, I sometimes work with them. Then there are more. I see well, when I was in California, I saw I saw some Japanese American people, but I didn't have much connections with them. because I was, mostly ESL student, meaning friends are mostly ESL students. So I didn't have many contact with local people. So there were a lot, Asian American people in Japan, I mean, in Southern California, but I didn't have contact with them. Here, I started, seeing more Asian American people in here in Houston, quite a few Asian American population here. Then I found, some of them are Japanese American people too, and some of my students are Japanese Americans too. So I feel I'm uh, I'm I'm more aware of Asian American people in Houston more than any other places because I didn't have much contact with them. Now that I have more contact with them, and also quite a few, people living in here and big communities, and also I'm more involved with, working with them too. I which I appreciate it and I like it. Although as I told you, I have a strong identity as Japanese. I don't think, I'm an Asian American. I'm Japanese because I'm Japanese. So in that sense, mm, of course, I enjoy seeing them, seeing Asian American people, working with Asian American people, but I consider myself as a different individual, having different identity with Asian American people.
It's really great that you had that opportunity to meet your like Japanese community here in
Yes,
Houston.
yes, yeah, it's been fun. Yeah, it's been great.
Sort of segueing into like more of your identity. What do you feel the most proud of?
About myself,
Yeah.
hmm, but personally,
Personally, professionally, like whatever comes to
profession.
mind.
Mm, okay. Mm, being as a single, I don't have any, family here. All my families are in Japan. If I have a family, if I have a kid or something, that might be different. But since I don't have, my kids or anyone, um, only thing I'm proud of, but at the same time I feel useless is my PhD degree. Was because I had to suffer so much, and that's the tangible thing I can see. But at the same time, I'm not sure how much I'm using it. So visually, or for my time commitment and also my all my mental, physical, personal commitment, PhD degree. But at the same time, I feel useless too. So let me think something better. Yeah, but living in the US by myself, supporting by myself is probably my biggest thing I can be proud of. Mm, yeah.
Do you still celebrate any of the festivals that you celebrated while you were still in Japan?
Yes, yeah. End of year and New Year's um is are the biggest, you know, festival, biggest holidays for Japanese. So I try to do, although I don't cook, for the special food for, New Year's Day, but I try to get together with my Japanese friends so that we can have some more Japanese atmosphere that, end of the year celebration and New Year's, relaxing, you know, sharing time with family. Yeah. So Yeah, every year, pretty much, I try to celebrate. I celebrate with my Japanese friends at the end of the year and New Year's.
Sounds like a lot of fun. How do you stay in touch with those still in Japan? Do you travel back often?
Yes, for sure, once a year. If I didn't have any, now that I don't have any visa issue, but before, getting a green card, I had a visa issue so that I couldn't go home like for 5 years. But other than that, I go home every year, every summer. If I can stay there whole summer, I did. If I have a job in the US, I couldn't. But other than that, I stayed, home, tried to my parents during the summer break.
That's great. What are some of your like hobbies and activities outside of your career?
Oh, I um well, I used to go to gym, not anymore, but I like watching dance, and I like dancing too. So I went to gym. When I went to gym, I really enjoyed Zumba. And I love watching musicals. I watched so many I couldn't even count like that. I'm really into musicals. And now that I started playing pickleball, which is my new hobby, yeah, but I like walking outside too. Yeah, so whenever I have time, during the semester it's hard, but whenever I have time, like during breaks, I try to get out and walk around. I like hiking, trekking, those things.
Sounds great to just like de-stress after work.
Yes,
So,
yes. Hmm. And also,
um,
I sit a lot, and I sit too long, so I try to walk around.
so we're almost near the end of the interview. So, is there anything that you would like to share that we have not covered in this interview?
Anything? At some point I thought about something, but probably not. Let me think. Did I answer completely? I'm a bit anxious. Was was my explanations good enough?
Yes, absolutely. If there's
Okay.
anything you'd like to explain more, like by all means, go ahead.
Mm, no, no, not really. I really, oh, no, I just wanted to add, I like, oh, I mean, obviously, I mean, I've been here for, a little less than 20 years, and I've been enjoying living in the US so much. And probably one thing I wanted to add, for cultural thing is probably especially as a single Japanese woman after a certain age, living in Japan is hard. Um, Even we have a career. So, for example, my friends, working, have specific career, specific status, the position that they worked really hard, but at the same time, they told me if there were men, everything would be a lot more easier. But I didn't feel the same way. I well, living in the US was hard because I had to take care of the things like well, like my status things, or my moving, or from small thing to big things. I had to deal with everything by myself. Of course, I can get help from my friends, or school, or many people, but at the same time, I had to be independent and I had to deal with things by myself. That was hard. But from the social view, in Japan, it's hard to live, especially at a certain age with a career, women, it seems really hard. In that sense, I'm lucky. Then after, certain years of living in the US, I feel more comfortable living in the US because of that social pressure, I think. That's what I found living in the US. So both, tougher side, better side, positive, more positive side that I really appreciate and enjoying. Also, I like living in here. It's probably, yeah, something I wanted to add.
Well, that you had this like great experience here. You didn't have to face that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great.
So with that, I would like to conclude our interview today. Thank you so much for
Okay.
talking
Yeah,
with
no
me.
problem. I hope I
I,
could do, I could have done better, but yeah, I hope this was good enough.
it was amazing. I really enjoyed learning more about your story, and I
Oh,
appreciate that
thank you.
you took the time to share with us
Oh,
today.
no, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for interviewing me.